He was weaving her into him. The intensity of him was entirely unnerving, yet the act of his attentions felt familiar, as though a ghost from another lifetime had reached through centuries to touch her again. A gasp slipped from Melody's lips as his hand tightened at her waist, pulling her flush against the marble hardness of his body. Every muscle of him was controlled, restrained, yet exuded a quiet menace. The air between them seemed to thrum, vibrate, as if the very room recognized him, something old and unholy responding to her shape, her scent, her soul. She could feel the subtle power in him, the aura of one who had lived countless lifetimes, who had known both love and betrayal so deeply it had turned him into a weapon of ice and fire. Her pulse raced in response, quick and traitorous. Her eyes rose, defiant and sharp, meeting his in wary disdain. "You have no right," she said, retreating from his hold, though every fiber of her betrayed her, part of her aching in dark, forbidden familiarity, because there was something in him that called to the broken, unhealed corners of her soul. A part of her longed for him, or tried to, but he didn't let her go. His head dipped, shadows clinging to his features like a shroud, obscuring and revealing at once. Hatred flickered in his eyes, cold and ancient, a storm barely contained behind the surface of his skin. Unreasonable, unfiltered malice reflected there, and Melody shivered at the weight of it. And then, slowly, as if some hidden fuse had ignited, the darkness in his gaze flared crimson, burning into her with impossible intensity. She saw herself in those eyes, terrified, trembling, alive, just before his hand rose to encircle her throat, a cold necklace of authority and promise. "It is ironic," he whispered, voice brushing against her skin like the edge of a blade, "that even when your face looks different, your eyes remain the same." The pressure of his fingers tightened imperceptibly, a reminder of her mortality, of his dominion over her. She wanted to recoil, yet could not tear herself from the gaze of someone so entirely terrifying, so overwhelmingly present. And yet, when the glow ebbed and his fingers loosened, she glimpsed beneath the fury a fracture, grief buried under centuries of cruelty. "What the hell is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling as her mind struggled to reconcile the beautiful and monstrous figure before her. "Obviously, there is some hatred you have towards me," she said, forcing strength into her tone. "Let me go, and I'll gladly disappear from your sight and your mind." He allowed her to pry free, but as she turned, his fingers snared her wrist with impossible speed, pulling her back into the prison of his arms. One hard tug left her pressed against him, every inch of his presence asserting dominance, yet tempered with something almost reverent. "It's frustrating," he murmured, breath cold against her ear, sending shivers through her spine. "How hollow revenge feels when the one who bears the sin does not remember the crime." His arms tightened, unyielding, cold. They were a cage made of his need, a restraint both binding and suffocating. Melody's glare met his, burning despite her fear. "Clearly there's a reason for this, and like every deranged villain, I'm sure you're dying to monologue about it. So go on. What are you?" He laughed, a low, cruel sound that resonated through the marble halls. It didn't belong to the young man she thought she saw. It belonged to someone who had walked through centuries of torment, who had died in every conceivable way and carried the sins of countless lifetimes within him. "Ah," he said, eyes sliding over the ballroom, dark amusement curling his lips. "Perhaps introductions are in order." Melody turned and screamed. The glittering ballroom of silk and candlelight was unrecognizable. The guests she had served only hours ago were now feeding, blood slick, ecstasy glazed across their faces. Men and women bent over limp bodies, mouths dripping with red, their eyes glazed with blissful hunger. Blood had pooled across marble floors, crimson rivers winding among shattered crystal and torn gowns. The air was thick with copper and perfume, a macabre symphony. Her mind splintered. She could only scream, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the sheer chaos. "This," he said behind her, voice dark and rich with mockery and pain, "is what I am, my Lyra. This is what you made me." "Lyra!" she choked, trembling. Who is Lyra?" But he was no longer where he had been. Now he appeared at the corner of her vision, a shadow given flesh, a predator moving with impossible grace. He was there and everywhere, following her like a ghost of her own past. Each appearance was punctuated with that same cruel reverence, that dangerous fascination that made her heart pound against her ribs like a desperate prisoner. She fled toward the gate, hands pounding on the ironwork, nails scraping against cold metal. "Vampires aren't real!" The words were swallowed by the night. Then, a jeweled hand lifted her chin, forcing her gaze to meet his. Crimson eyes flared, unnatural, hungry, knowing. Every detail of him, the elegance of his movements, the precision of his control, the subtle threat in his posture was terrifyingly beautiful. "Keep shouting," he said, voice low and velvet smooth. "Scream until the night tires of hearing your denial. Call me myth, call me madness." His breath ghosted her lips, carrying the scent of something forbidden. "Because when you run out of breath and your heartbeat falters, I will still be here, and I will still bite you." Yet beneath the terrifying certainty there was no cruelty, only inevitability. He hesitated, as though even damnation could falter. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw with reverent care, unsteady despite centuries of predatory mastery. "I swore I would destroy your bloodline," he murmured. "And now, standing before you, I no longer know if I wish to destroy or devour you." The words fell between them, heavy, aching with the weight of centuries. Melody's breath hitched, her pulse stuttered in her chest, not just from fear but from the strange, undeniable pull between them. When his fangs pierced her skin, it was not an act of violence, it was recognition. Her blood touched his tongue, and eternity shifted. Power surged through him bright and cold, flooding every cursed vein until he staggered, overcome. Her taste, sweet, vital, unlike any he had ever known, stilled the hunger that had haunted him for centuries. For the first time since his damnation, he felt complete. She gasped, trembling as the bond sealed, a silver thread of pulse and soul winding between them. His fangs withdrew slowly, his lips stained crimson, his hand cupping her cheek with the gentleness of a dying man clutching his last prayer. Her eyes opened to find his gaze, not hateful now, but hollow with awe and terror. The witch was right, he whispered softly, almost to himself. Fate would bring me my undoing. She did not tell me it would come in the form of you. His thumb brushed the blood from her throat, lingering at her lips. Reverence, longing, despair, all warred within him, a tempest restrained by centuries of self-control. In her pulse, he heard Lyra's laughter. In her eyes, he saw the same soul that had once damned him. And though every instinct screamed for vengeance, all he could do was touch her face again, memorizing the contours, the warmth, the living presence of what fate had returned to him. She was not Lyra, she was Melody, and she was his bloodmate, his salvation and his ruin. The silver thread that connected them pulsed quietly at first, almost imperceptibly like a heartbeat beneath the skin. But with each passing moment it grew stronger, winding around their souls, tugging at memory and instinct alike. Melody could feel it in the small, sharp shivers down her spine, in the subtle tug in her chest, in the way her thoughts suddenly were not entirely her own. Every fear, every pulse of curiosity, every spark of desire seemed mirrored back to her by him, though she could also feel his darkness, an edge of obsession that made her stomach coil. He moved silently behind her as she attempted to gather herself. The ballroom's horrors burned into her mind. Bloodied floors and grotesque shadows of revelers seemed almost distant now, replaced by the awareness of him, of his presence that bent reality, that made walls and time feel pliable. His eyes, once mere crimson, now seemed to burn through everything, seeing into her very self, dissecting her, claiming her as he had centuries ago claimed the world around him. You feel it too, don't you? He murmured, the words brushing against her mind almost as much as her ears. The bond. It's intoxicating, painful, dangerous. But you feel it, Melody. You feel me. She swallowed hard, trying to maintain the human distance she had relied on all her life. I feel you, but I don't understand it, she admitted. Her voice wavered, a thread of vulnerability that he seized and amplified, as if simply hearing it deepened the hunger in him. He stepped closer, close enough that the air between them seemed to hum, the shadows around him folding like silk. Understand? His tone was dark amusement, but underneath a storm of raw obsession raged. You cannot understand, not fully. You are mortal, bound by a life too short to comprehend the weight of mine. I have walked centuries, loved, lost, killed, betrayed, endured horrors that would hollow your mind in a single night. She lifted her chin, refusing to flinch, though a tremor betrayed her. Then perhaps that's why I shouldn't be able to understand. I don't want to be like you. I don't want your shadows. He laughed softly, low and dangerous. It wasn't mocking, not entirely. It was pleasure in the acknowledgement of her defiance, her fire. Shadows, he repeated, the word curling around them like smoke. Yes, shadows and light. The bond is both, Melody, and the darkness you see in me. I never intended to show it to you. Yet now, here you are, and I cannot stop. He reached for her again, fingers brushing her hair from her face with a reverence that seemed almost painful, almost sacred in its obsession. Melody felt the pull of his thoughts mingling with hers, the centuries of rage, the meticulous plotting, the love that had once been raw and innocent, now twisted into obsession and need, and she realized in that terrible, thrilling instant that she was part of it too. Her pulse, her very essence, was now entwined with his. You are mine, he said, voice low and rough, laced with desire and the sharp edge of control. Even if I should destroy you, even if my own hands should ruin you, even then, you are mine. Melody's mind reeled. Human words could not encompass what it felt like to exist within the same space as someone who had lived centuries. He acted like a man who had been denied reason, who existed on obsession and instinct, and yet he treated her with a meticulous care that was almost psychotic in its intensity. Every gesture was possessive, every glance consuming. She wanted to run, but her legs would not obey entirely. Part of her craved the very darkness she feared. Over the next hours, days, or what seemed like days as time bent unnaturally around him, she began to feel the bond's true power. She could sense his hunger, yes, but also his doubt, the fracture beneath centuries of pride and cruelty. And he could feel hers, the uncertainty, the terror, the desire, the shock at knowing herself so intimately tied to a being whose very existence defied everything she had ever known. He was relentless in his fixation, following her through corridors, appearing at the periphery of her vision when she thought herself alone, brushing against her when she reached for candles or books, whispering promises that teetered between devotion and threat. Melody began to understand how dangerous love could be when it was sharpened by centuries of obsession, when it was fed by the kind of darkness that left no room for compromise. Yet, even as he hovered on the edge of madness, there were moments when she glimpsed the man beneath the monster. Moments when he would linger, thumb against her cheek, and she could feel centuries of sorrow and love pressed into the smallest gestures. When he looked at her, it was not only as prey, not only as obsession, it was as the single person who could undo him completely. "I've survived centuries," he said one evening, voice a low rumble in the candle-lit chamber. "I have killed, I have burned, I have wept in shadows where no light could reach, and yet I cannot survive without you. You, your blood, your soul, your very presence, it binds me more completely than any revenge, any hatred. I cannot stop thinking of you." She drew back slightly, frightened by the intensity of his words and the shadow of his madness. "You shouldn't think of me at all," she said, trembling. You shouldn't touch me like this. You're dangerous. I don't belong in your world." His eyes flashed, crimson fire lacing the shadows beneath. "Dangerous," he said softly, almost to himself. "Perhaps. But you, Melody, you are the only thing dangerous enough to unmake me, to undo everything I have been. You are the edge of every thought, every heartbeat I have left." And in that moment, the lines between fear and desire, hate and love, obsession and affection blurred completely. Melody could feel the pulse of his thoughts mingling with hers, the bond tugging at them both, feeding them with the same intensity. She could feel the need in him, raw and unfiltered, like a tide rising, and she realized with a terror that thrilled her that she needed him just as much. Their interactions became a careful dance of power and intimacy. She moved with caution, yet the slightest touch from him sent shivers through her. He hovered, watched, waited, sometimes tenderly, sometimes dangerously, always aware of the fine line they walked between obsession and devotion. His possessiveness sharpened every glance, every word. Every movement of hers was catalogued, consumed, and reflected back to her in ways she could not fully comprehend. "You are mine," he whispered again one night, as she attempted to write in her journal, fingers brushing her hand with terrifying gentleness. "Not because I wish to claim you, not merely because I have been denied for centuries, but because fate, and perhaps madness, have intertwined our souls so completely that there is no escape." Melody felt the truth of it in her pulse, her thoughts, even her dreams. She dreamed of Lyra again, of the past he had carried, and of the centuries he had spent plotting revenge. And yet in the same dreams she felt his tenderness, his longing, his obsession transformed into something unbearably intimate. She woke trembling, unsure where fear ended and desire began. Their nights became a labyrinth of tension, shared meals, whispered conversations, stolen touches that both thrilled and terrified her. She noticed how the slightest glance from him could make her blood race, how the bond allowed them to anticipate each other's movements, emotions, even thoughts. It was intoxicating, addictive, and maddening. He taught her the rhythms of the vampire world, not to fear it entirely, but to survive within it. Yet he never relinquished his fixation. Every lesson, every demonstration, every shadowed moment in the hallways of his estate was punctuated by the undeniable and almost psychopathic intensity of his attention. "You are more than human," he said one evening as she struggled with a lock on her chest. "You are extraordinary, and yet you will never understand what it is to live as I do, to be haunted and consumed by desire, by rage, by centuries of love lost. That is mine alone, until now, until you." The words hung between them like smoke curling around the chamber, inescapable. Melody understood with an ache both terrifying and enthralling that the bond was changing them both. She felt his loneliness, his obsession, his desire, and she felt her own, mirrored back with equal intensity. She realized that the line between fear and fascination, life and death, love and madness, was nearly impossible to discern.